All right, tell you what, start, okay? He will join, whoever is missing.
Okay. Our presentation so far, basically how cycle 3 has gone. In the first week, we had it so that when you were picking up items and dropping them, it was actually adding and removing the abilities. We added the legendary item, that God Scepter. We had the enemy animation and the player remodel created. Going into this week, we did tweak some of their animations because they weren't the best, but they are getting a lot better now. It's looking a lot cleaner. We did a lot of code cleaning just because some of the code was kind of messy. We were able to delete some files, consolidate stuff. Going into this week, we added a rare and a mythic item. So now we have one of each rarity. That way we can create the item store. We also added item descriptions. So when you are near an item, it will tell you what the item does at the bottom of the screen. Someone requested that. Then we also added a death animation. When someone dies, their body kind of flickers. There was an audio error that we fixed. Someone recommended, sometimes it's not possible to see the next platform, so we zoomed out the camera, so now it's a little bit better. We also made it so now the icons actually scale. So if you're playing on a small screen or you're playing on a big screen, the everything on the menu scales accordingly. And we have the jetpack double jump created. We have not put it in the live version that's up right now. But basically we're shifting. What the jetpack was that it changed your gravity, it lowered your gravity. And what we're going to change it to now is that while you're in the air, you will be able to get a second jump. And then because right now the items are still, you can still pick up multiple items. If you pick up multiple jetpacks, it will separately change the height that you can jump on that second jump. So then the stuff that we have in progress right now, the item store, we have it just roughly thrown in there for this demo, but we have to add in being able to purchase items because right now they just appear there without any UI or anything. We're still shifting everything to the new theme, so every single platform, shifting them over. We're in the middle of making the sprite for the mini boss, and then also we're starting to do the score system. So the way the score system is going to work is that we're going to do the time that you've survived and the amount of coins that you've selected, but it's a 1-to-1 ratio that for every coin that you've collected, you can only get 1 point for every minute that you've survived. So if you just stand there for an hour and you've only collected 10 coins, you will only get 20 points. That way, you can't just stay still, but it kind of rewards you for both sides. And that won't be like if you spend currency, it won't subtract from your points. It will just be coins that you've collected over time. We might change that. Just that's what our initial scoring system that we were thinking about was. If anyone has any other ideas, they could mention it. We could also include like killing enemies as score or whatever it may be. Planned for next week, we want to remodel the menu because we haven't touched that up in a while. We have the mini boss sprite being created right now, so then we'll transition to making the animation for the mini boss and try to get them done. We'll start doing the boss's sprite, and then in week 4 we can actually implement the boss. And then the only other thing that's left on the agenda for week 3 is basically just making some type of consumable, because the mushrooms increase your maximum amount of health, but if your maximum amount of health is 5 and you take 2 damage, you would need to have some way of healing back up to 5. So that's what this consumable will basically do. We don't have any intentions to make any more consumables besides basically heals. But once we have everything made, our week 4 is essentially just making some tweaks to some small things, just getting that boss finalized. And then since we have the entire infrastructure made, we're just going to mass produce a bunch of items and a bunch of platforms just to get the overall game completely finished. So that's our scale for it. I can show you the current live version right now.
Okay.
We actually kept, if you go to the site, we actually kept all the old versions, so you can kind of go back and play those just to see the difference. So we have a wall right here, which obviously stops you from going to the side. We have that bullet that you can shoot. The bullet actually kills the enemy. And stuff that we have to implement is now damage, how much health they have, those different aspects. And so the way that it works, if I can just get through 10 platforms, so that right there is one platform. This right here would be the second, the third, fourth, fifth, and so on. And once I get to 10, every remainder of 10 will spawn an item store, which is what we're going to do to spawn the item store, the mini boss, and the boss. Let's see. And so if I just continue real quick, it should come up shortly right here. All right, so this is just the quick made item store. So basically what will happen in the item store is that you'll be able to have 3 items, one that's rare, which will be blue, one that's mythic, which will be red, and one that's legendary, which will be gold. If you look at the abilities, so the legendary increases pretty much everything except subtracts health from you. The rare gives you +4 and -1, and the blue gives you +2 and -1. So all that can be tweaked depending on what we want to do. But everything right now is pretty much at a functional state. That's the death animation or hurt animation when you get hurt. And basically what we're looking to do in the next week should pretty much kind of finalize what we have. We've run into a couple errors that we were able to fix, but I don't think there's anything currently in the game that hasn't been fixed within the last couple weeks. I know people had recommendations. We were kind of looking through those. Does anyone have any questions, any recommendations that didn't get addressed? One quick other thing. Oh, that's a thing we can fix. So this actual platform right here. Let's see. That's very odd.
There is a platform there? Oh.
So it got clipped. So that slope right there, what we actually were planning on implementing was making it almost like a mudslide. We should be able to change the friction to 0 on that, which would cause the player to slide down it. But that's pretty much kind of what we're going to go through. But yeah, so that's the running state. Like I said, you guys have the link if you want to check it out. One other thing is that kind of once we get everything finished, we may start to containerize. Like we may set an individual platform, like an individual room, say, is kind of the name that we have for it, will be a combination of maybe one item and small little sections. So that instead of every single time that, because one comment that someone made was that it should be more random. Our thing is completely random. Every single platform that we've created has a completely random chance that it can happen. If the same thing happens 10 times in a row, it just happens to be that the coin flipped heads every time. But what we were thinking was that if one room is large and it's the same exact thing every time, we might be able to kind of divvy up the room into smaller components so that each room ends up being slightly altered, just so that it is a little, like, it's not as consistent every time.
Good.
So that's what we've been doing. Does anyone have any questions? Any?
Have you been successful with that kind of partition?
Yeah. So one other thing was that people wanted to see some of the code. So if I want to, you guys can still see this, right?
Yeah.
All right. So some of the things that we're doing. So for every single item, they all have an instance, which pretty much has the description of the item that displays when you hover over, when you get near it, what happens when you add the ability, what happens when you remove the ability, and then it's awake. One of the things that we did do when you're running into a wall, it was stopping the velocity. We went into the kinematics and just made it so that it does stop the X velocity, but it keeps the Y velocity. So now it doesn't kind of awkwardly clip when you hit the wall. We may tweak that. We may make it so that it at least reduces the velocity, just so that there's kind of a little bit of balance to it, but that's something that we can look into. When it comes to platform generation, the general way that it works is that it's finding everything that's labeled a platform. It chooses a random one from the index of how many of them there are. It creates it. If it's a remainder of 10, then it creates the item store. If it's not a remainder of 10, then it generates the platform. And then at the end of it, it decides what the new platform is going to be, and that just keeps continuing. And when it comes to getting the width and getting the height, it has to do for loops to iterate throughout every poly collider and find what is the max x direction, and then at the max x direction, what is the max y direction. That's how all that works. Someone mentioned about the parallax background. So the thing that we have that kind of moves with the object, it as you move, it's moving at a velocity relative to the camera, and basically there's two images of it. So the second that that one gets to the end of it, then it renders the next one, and then they just kind of alternate between the two of them. And that's pretty much it. Our bullet that we made, this is what it's doing for the bullet, which is also, if we want to make a second one, like if we want to make an item that changes it from a bullet to something else, it's under a category of weapon, so we should be able to do that if that's what we end up doing. But that's kind of a majority of the code. Is there anything else anyone wanted to know?
Good.